The moment that finally cracked something in me didn't come during a fight or a crisis. It came during a quiet Sunday dinner when my mother laughed and said, "Well, at least we never have to worry about you. You're the easy one." She said it like a compliment. Everyone nodded. My brother smiled. I smiled too, because I had learned that correcting the story only made people uncomfortable. I have always been the responsible one, the child who didn't need reminders, the adult who paid bills early, showed up on time, remembered birthdays, and handled problems before they became visible. I was dependable in a way that never drew attention. Reliability in my family was treated like background noise. Always there, never acknowledged. My younger brother Mark was the opposite. Emotional, impulsive, constantly figuring things out. His mistakes were framed as growing pains. His failures became group discussions. When he needed help, everyone leaned in. When I needed help, it was assumed I'd already solved it. At first, the favoritism felt small. Mark needed help covering rent one month. My parents asked if I could transfer some money and they'd settle it later. I did it without hesitation. Family helps family. That phrase came up a lot. Later never came, but no one mentioned it again. Then it happened again and again. Mark changed jobs. Mark was stressed. Mark had bad luck. Each explanation was delivered gently, as if protecting him from judgment. My role stayed the same. I was the one who could handle it, the one who didn't make things complicated. Holidays made it clearer. Mark arrived late, empty-handed, emotionally raw. He left reassured, forgiven, sometimes financially supported. I arrived early, brought food, fixed whatever was broken, drove relatives home. If I looked tired, someone would joke that I was too serious or too grown up. Responsibility was treated like a personality flaw. When I moved out, the dynamic didn't change. It just became more transactional. Calls came when something needed paying, fixing, or smoothing over. My parents framed it as trust. We wouldn't ask if we didn't know you could handle it. Saying no felt like betraying an identity I'd been assigned without consent. What hurt wasn't just the money, it was how my contributions slowly vanished from the family narrative. My mom would tell relatives that Mark had managed to get back on his feet, leaving out the transfers I'd made. My dad would say, "We all chipped in," when I knew exactly who had. The first time I gently corrected my mother, she frowned and said, "That's not how I remember it." She wasn't angry. She was confused, like I'd challenged a harmless detail. I let it go. I always let it go. Over time, I stopped talking about my own stress. There was always a comparison ready. Mark had it worse. Someone else needed more. I learned to minimize myself before anyone else could. The realization didn't arrive dramatically. It settled in slowly, like dust you only notice when light hits it just right. I wasn't being appreciated for being responsible. I was being relied on because it was convenient. My silence wasn't strength, it was permission. That Sunday night after the joke, I went home and sat alone in my kitchen. I didn't feel angry, I felt tired in a new way. Not exhausted from helping, but from being unseen while doing it. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped playing the role everyone loved me for. I didn't know it yet, but that question was the beginning of everything changing. Once I stopped brushing things off, the pattern became impossible to ignore. It wasn't one big act of exploitation. It was dozens of small assumptions stacked on top of each other over years. Every request carried the same tone, like the answer had already been decided. "Can you help just this once?" Even though it had never been just once. "You're better with money." Even though no one ever asked how much it was costing me. Mark's problems kept evolving, but the solution stayed the same. He needed time. He needed support. He needed understanding. My parents repeated those words like a script. When I asked what he was actually doing to change his situation, they'd say I was being judgmental. When I pointed out how often I was involved financially, they'd say I was exaggerating. The gaslighting didn't come with raised voices or insults. It came with confusion and denial. My mom would genuinely act surprised when I mentioned specific transfers. "Are you sure?" she'd ask. "I thought we paid that." My dad would say, "You know we'd never take advantage of you," as if intention erased impact. Each conversation ended the same way. I walked away feeling like I'd imagined everything. The emotional toll showed up quietly. I started feeling tense every time my phone rang. I'd see my parents' names and feel my stomach tighten, already calculating what they might need. I slept fine, worked fine, functioned fine, but there was a constant pressure under everything, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. What hurt the most was how easily my past help was rewritten. Mark would talk about getting through hard times without mentioning how. My parents would say things like, "We've all sacrificed," while looking straight at me. When I reminded them of specifics, they'd change the subject or tell me I was being negative. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was a text from my dad asking if I could cover Mark's car payment because he was really struggling right now. I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I just felt empty. I replied that I couldn't help this time. Not a speech, not a confrontation, just one sentence. The response was immediate. My mom called, her voice tight but controlled. She said she didn't recognize me anymore, that I used to be generous. That family doesn't abandon each other when things get hard. When I reminded her of how much I'd already done, she said the words I'd heard too many times before. "That's not how I remember it." Something in me went still. I realized then that this wasn't about memory. It was about comfort. Their version of events required my silence to stay intact. I hung up without arguing. I sat there for a long time, replaying years of conversations in my head. Every time I doubted myself, every time I backed down to keep the peace, I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding. They weren't misunderstanding me. They were choosing not to see me. That night, I opened my bank history and messages and laid everything out in front of me. Not with anger, with clarity. The numbers spoke without emotion. The pattern was undeniable. And for the first time, I stopped asking how to make them understand and started asking a different question. What would happen if I didn't fix this for them anymore? The answer scared me more than anything they'd ever said. And that fear told me I was finally seeing the truth. I didn't confront anyone with my realization. I didn't announce a new boundary or make a dramatic decision. I simply stopped stepping in before I was asked. The first time it happened, it felt unnatural. My mom mentioned that Mark was behind on a bill, said it casually like she was setting the stage. I waited. Normally, that was my cue. I'd offer to help before she finished the sentence. This time I stayed quiet. There was an awkward pause. She filled it by saying they'd figure something out. I said okay and changed the subject. After that, the request became more direct. My dad asked if I could help Mark cover a shortfall just for this month. I told him I couldn't. I didn't justify it. I didn't explain my budget. I didn't remind him of the past. I said no the way they'd always said no to my needs. Calm, final, unemotional. Internally, I was terrified. I expected yelling, accusations, guilt trips. Instead, there was confusion. Not concern for me, but disruption. My refusal had created a gap they weren't used to seeing. For years, my compliance had been the invisible glue holding everything together. I started documenting everything more deliberately, not to weaponize it, but to anchor myself in reality. Dates, amounts, the exact wording of messages. Every time someone suggested I was overreacting, I could quietly remind myself that I wasn't. I didn't need them to agree anymore. Mark noticed quickly. He texted me late one night, irritated, asking why I'd suddenly changed. I told him I hadn't. I was just handling my responsibilities, not his. He accused me of being cold. I replied once more carefully. "I love you, but I'm not your backup plan." Then I stopped responding. Without my support, things didn't collapse. They strained. My parents stepped in more often and resented it. I could hear it in the way my mom spoke about Mark now, sharper than before. They were experiencing the weight I'd been carrying quietly for years, and they didn't like how heavy it was. Eventually, they tried to talk to me about it. Not angrily, cautiously. My mom said she didn't understand why I was pulling away from the family. I told her I wasn't pulling away. I was just no longer overextending myself to keep everyone comfortable. She said families don't keep track of who does what. I said families shouldn't pretend effort doesn't exist either. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list numbers. I didn't show proof. I didn't need to. The truth didn't require performance. Mark accused me of abandoning him. I looked at him and realized something I'd never allowed myself to think before. He wasn't helpless. He was enabled, and my refusal had forced him to face a reality he'd been shielded from. The more calmly I held my boundary, the more unreasonable they sounded when they pushed against it. That wasn't strategy, it was consequence. I didn't punish them. I didn't expose anyone. I simply removed the safety net that had been mistaken for love. And without my quiet participation, the entire story they'd been telling themselves began to fall apart on its own. The aftermath didn't come all at once. It unfolded slowly, in small adjustments and strained silences. My parents stopped calling for favors, but they didn't start calling to check in either. Conversations became polite and shallow. My mother began telling people I was very independent lately, as if independence were a recent phase instead of something I'd been forced into my whole life. Mark struggled more openly, not in a dramatic way, just enough to be uncomfortable. Late payments, missed plans, excuses that no longer landed the way they used to. My parents complained about him now, something they'd never done before. I listened without stepping in. That was the hardest part. Staying silent while the old instinct to rescue clawed at me. There were moments when guilt tried to rewrite the story again. Late at night, I'd wonder if I'd been too harsh, if maybe I should have helped just one more time. But then I'd remember how many one more times had already passed, how many years I'd spent proving my worth through sacrifice, and how easily that sacrifice had been dismissed once it became inconvenient. No one apologized, not directly. My mom hinted that things had been misunderstood. My dad said they'd all made mistakes. Mark said I'd changed and didn't sound like myself anymore. I realized then that the version of me they missed was the one who didn't resist. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending my choices. I let them be uncomfortable with the boundaries they'd never had to respect before. I learned that clarity doesn't need consensus. Self-respect doesn't require witnesses. The peace that followed wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. I noticed it when my phone rang and my chest didn't tighten. When I made financial decisions without mentally accounting for someone else's crisis. When I realized I hadn't checked my bank history in weeks because I no longer needed to reassure myself that I wasn't imagining things. The last real conversation I had with my mother about it ended with her saying, "We just thought you were okay." And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to argue. I was okay, not because they finally understood me, but because I stopped needing them to. I don't hate my family. I see them clearly now. Favoritism doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like love directed unevenly, justified by convenience. Responsibility isn't a virtue when it's assigned without consent. And loyalty that requires self-erasure isn't loyalty at all. Walking away from the role didn't make me selfish. It made me honest. I didn't get validation. I didn't get gratitude. What I got was something better. Ownership of my time, my money, my energy, my story. That's the quiet truth no one talks about. When you stop being useful, some people lose interest. But when you stop betraying yourself, you finally gain something they were never able to give you. Peace.